Hi, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joyofbaking.com. Today we're going to make a pre-baked pie crust. You can use this pastry for either sweet or savory pies and tarts. And you can make it either by hand, or I'm going to show you how to make it in the food processor today. So to start, you will need 1 1/4 cups, which is 170 grams of all-purpose flour. You may know that as plain flour. Just put that in, along with 1/2 teaspoon of salt, and I like to use the kosher salt, and just a teaspoon of white sugar. And then I'm just going to process this just until it's combined and get a little air. So if you were doing this by hand, you might want to use a wire whisk and then just whisk it. Okay, and then you will need 6 tablespoons, that's 85 grams of unsalted butter, and 2 tablespoons, that's 28 grams of either shortening or lard. Now, the important thing is to have your butter cold. So what I like to do, about 15 minutes before I'm going to make the pastry, I cut the butter into little small cubes, and then I just put it in the freezer, and then that gets it really nice and cold. So I'm just going to add this. Now if you were doing this by hand, just sprinkle it over the top, and then cut the butter into the flour. You could use a pastry blender or 2 knives. If you're using the food processor like I am here, just use your pulse button. And what you want to do is just pulse it or cut the butter into the flour just until it's in little small pieces like coarse crumbs. That shouldn't take, if you're in the food processor, maybe 15 seconds. Yeah, let's give that a look. It's just a touch more. Now don't worry if there's some large pieces of butter. That's okay. But this is kind of what you're looking for, just kind of coarse crumbs. Okay, simple enough. Now, the last thing is some water. We need some ice cold water to bind the flour with the butter. So what I do, as you can see here, is I just fill a cup with some ice and then put some water in. Now, we will need, this amount of pastry will make like an 8 or 9 inch, that's 23 centimeter pie crust or tart crust. And so you will need about 3 to 4 tablespoons of water. It really kind of depends. But what you want to do is add it 1 tablespoon at a time. If you were doing it by hand, what you're going to do is just 1 tablespoon at a time, just sprinkle it like this over the top, and then use a fork to kind of work it in. If you are using a food processor, you could just use it, put your water 1 tablespoon at a time through the feed tube, and then just pulse. Now what you're looking for is the pastry, you don't want it a big ball. What you're looking for is it just starts to clump together, and when you press a little between your fingers, it'll stick together. So that's 1 tablespoon. You'll put the ice in there. And then I'm just going to pulse through my feed tube. That's 2. And I find I need at least 3. So what I'm going to do is just check that. You can see I think that's probably, it's just starting to come together. And so 3 is enough. You never know, because the flour can absorb, depending on your flour, can absorb different amount of water. So that's why you just do it 1 tablespoon at a time. So now what I'm going to do is just, that's pretty simple to do. I'm just going to empty it right on my counter. Now we are going to chill this, and that makes it a lot easier to roll out. So just gather it into a ball. so. Gather up all the little pieces. And then just take a piece of plastic wrap, or you could, if you have it like a plastic bag, you could use that as well. And then just flatten it into a round disc, because that'll make it easier for us to roll it out if it's already in the shape we want. So, just about like that. So now just cover it. Now, it probably, depending on how cold your fridge is, it will take somewhere between 30 and 60 minutes. You could, if you wanted to, even leave it a couple days, or this pastry, just like this, could be frozen for about a month, and then you can just defrost it overnight in your refrigerator. So now we're ready to roll out our pastry. So you will need some flour, and what you want to do is, we don't want the pastry sticking to our counter, so flour your counter, and then you're going to also flour your rolling pin. I'm using a 9-inch, 23-centimeter pie plate, Pyrex one. You could use ceramic or whatever you have. And then, so what we want to do is put about 12, 13-inch round. You just about 30 centimeter. So the trick here is the pastry needs to be at the right temperature, and then flour everything. And as you're rolling, roll from the center out, and keep lifting and turning the pastry as you roll out so that it doesn't stick. And then if you find it sticking, just put more flour down. If you find it cracks a little, just kind of put it back together. And then just kind of keep your shape, your round shape as you go. Okay, that looks good. So what I'm going to do is I just take my pie plate and I just put it on top here, and then I just see whether it's about the right size. That looks good. So then just take your rolling pin and just gently. Now if you find there's a lot of flour, you could just take a pastry brush, whoops, and brush that off, and then just kind of loosely roll it and then unroll it like so. Wasn't perfect, but there. Okay. Now don't worry if it rips a little. And just kind of patch that up. Now if you notice, this pastry had a little bit of either shortening or lard in it, and that's to make it a lot easier to roll, and it also gives it a little bit of flakiness to the texture. So now when you're fitting it in, kind of push it down. You don't want to pull the pastry. You don't want to stretch it, because then it will shrink during baking. So what we're going to do is gently kind of press it down. Like I said, if it rips, don't worry about that. Just patch it up. Just move around like I'm doing. And then just take your index finger kind of into the corners there. So then just fold it. Had a little rip there, so I'm going to patch that up. It's quite forgiving, so don't worry about it. And then just kind of press it down. And then I just take a knife and just cut off your excess pastry. Now some people like, if you like lots of pastry, you could just tuck it under itself. Now don't throw this pastry out. Keep it, because just in case we have some cracking while it bakes, well, we can just patch it up with that extra pastry. Now you could just take the tines of a fork and press down, or, I mean, everybody has their way of how they like to flute their, I just take that and, I don't know what you can see, and just press like that. Little design. Okay, so there's our pie crust. So what we're going to do is we're going to cover that. We're going to put it back in the fridge to chill just a little while we preheat our oven. So preheat your oven to 425 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 215 degrees Celsius. Okay, so now we're ready to bake our pie crust. So there's a couple things you can do to prevent the pie crust from puffing up while it bakes. And one is take a fork and then just press some holes all over the pastry. And the second thing we're going to do is we're going to take a large round of either, you can use parchment paper or aluminum foil. And I like to just lightly either butter or spray it so that it doesn't stick to our pastry. Just want a nice light coating. And then turn that upside down. Fit the paper or foil. And then I'm going to fill this with some, you can actually buy pie weights. You could use rice, or I just bought a bag of dried beans and just use that. Of course, don't use those for cooking. Just keep them in a bag like I have for this purpose only. And then you see you want to have the round of your parchment or aluminum foil bigger than your pie shell, because we're going to have to lift that out, and you need some paper there to lift it out easily. So just make sure you get the beans right to the edge. And this also will prevent that crust as it bakes from puffing up. So it keeps its nice shape. So I think I'll just put a little more. Okay, that's good. So now what we're going to do is bake it for about 15 minutes, or until you can see the sides here are just beginning to start to brown. Okay, so that was about 15 minutes. And as you can see, the crust is just beginning to brown. So that's about what you're looking for. So now what we have to do, so I have a bowl beside, we have to lift the weights out. So that's why you want a bigger piece of parchment or wax paper, so you can do this easily, although you might lose some beans out the side. Okay. So there we have it. Now this is what you would call a partially baked pie crust. So if you have a recipe that calls for that, this is the stage you're going. If you find that you have some cracking, then remember that extra pastry you had, just kind of patch it around, and then it will bake when you put it back in the oven. Because now you're going to reduce your oven temperature to 375 degrees Fahrenheit, which is 190 degrees Celsius. And what we're going to do now is bake it the rest of the way like this, because we've set it, just until the crust is no longer, it's still a little wet. So it looks dry and just a little bit of browning. So that will take, depending on your oven, about 10 minutes. Okay, so our pie crust is now done. As you can see, just lightly tinged with brown, even a little on the bottom, and it's nice and dry. So, essentially, it's ready. You have a pre-baked pie crust. Now, if you want to seal your crust, which is good when so that the filling does not seep as much into your crust, what you can do while it's still hot is take one large egg white, and then we're going to lightly beat it with just a pinch of salt. I like to use just a pinch of salt because it breaks up your egg white for you. Okay, and then just take a pastry brush and just lightly brush your hot crust with a little of the Egg white, and then that'll just kind of bake right on there. You could pop it back into the oven for a minute or two if you want to do that. Or if, say, you forgot to do this and your pie crust had cooled, then you can do that. Another idea, if you don't want to use the egg white, is to take some apricot preserves, heat them up, strain them, and then brush your cooled crust with that. Or you could use melted chocolate. So there. So our pie crust is now ready. So until next time, I'm Stephanie Jaworski of joybaking.com.